So just for a few minutes, I want to just share some thoughts on gratitude with you. So my eldest sister, her name was Doretha Ann, may she rest in peace, used to sing a song and it's called Count Your Blessings. The song was written by Reginald Morgan and Edith Temple. My sister was 11 years old when the song was first released in 1948. The lyrics go something like this. I'm not going to try to sing it, y'all. I'm just going to read it. When you're discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings. Name them one by one. And it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Are you ever burdened with a load of care? Count your blessings. Name them one by one. And it will surprise you what the Lord has done. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged. God is over all. Count your blessings. Name them one by one. And it will surprise you what the Lord has done. The year after this song was written, when my sister was 12 years old, she was stricken with an illness that ultimately led to her gradually losing her eyesight until she was totally blind as she grew older. And the illness came with other limitations that limited her in her mobility and her ability to be independent and live on her own. She was the second of 11 children and the eldest of 7 girls. So there was 6, she had 6 sisters younger than her. She lived at home with our parents until she was in her early 40s. Then at that time, with the assistance of the New Jersey Commission for the Blind, who was able to provide support services, it enabled her to get a job, to work outside the home. Actually, she was taking public transportation at one point. She got her own apartment and she lived independently on her own with support for nearly the next 20 years. When I think about growing up and my memories of my sister, she was never a doubter. She was not a complainer. She didn't live her life as a victim. She was vibrant, high-spirited, assertive, and full of life. She loved to cook and she was known for her sweet potato pies. She loved to dress and she was a classy dresser. She was a hairstylist. She had 6 sisters younger than her and 5 of us were much younger than her, and she combed all of our hair and styled them for back to school, for special events at church, for Easter programs. She did all the hair washing and styling and combing for us. She loved people. She had an engaging personality and she loved life. When I think about being grateful, I think about my sister Doretha. She, of no fault of her own, became ill as a child, resulting in what many would think or perceive to be tragic. But my sister didn't think of herself in that way, or her life as being a loss or a tragedy. Rather, she always took the time to count her blessings. She lived from a position of gratitude. She never talked about what she lost or didn't have or could have had. She always talked about what she had. She loved to sing, although she couldn't hold a note. And I'm telling you, y'all, she was much worse than me. You would hold your ear because it would drown you out. But she would belt out that song every time she could. Count your blessings. Name them one by one. Count your many blessings. See what God has done. Doretha passed peacefully at home. She was living with my daughter in January of 2017. She was 80 years old. I count it a blessing to have had her as my oldest sister. And like the lyrics of the song, I would say to others, too often we become ensnared in the conflicts of life. The storms and the turbulences of life's journey will trip us up. We all go through storms in life. The sun and the rain meet us all on our journey. What makes the difference, though, in our life is not so much about what happens to you, but it's been said that your attitude determines your altitude. Meaning, are you able to ride the waves of the storm, or does it take you under? Are you able to go through, or are you going through kicking and screaming and losing your mind and adding trouble to trouble? Or do you go through with an attitude of, this too shall pass? Always fighting the good fight of faith, as Doretha did, and not succumbing to the circumstances of life, but rising above them. I'm an old bid whiz player back in the day. I love to play cards, and bid whiz was my game. What I know is that the best card player is not the one who's dealt the best hand. It doesn't work like that. The best card player is the one who plays their hand the best, regardless of what you're dealt. You can turn what some would consider a losing hand into a winning hand if you know how to play the game. Life is not about the hand that you've been dealt, but it's about how will you play the hand. Are you going to throw it in because it's not the hand that you like? Or are you going to play the hand that you dealt to the max? Let me share another story with you as I bring this to a close. Roger Taney was a white man born on March 17th, 1777, who became the 5th Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court in 1836. He was born in the South to aristocracy. He had wealth and privilege. Another man named Dred Scott was born in the South, 1799. So historians think. They're not sure because, unlike Roger Taney, Dred Scott was an enslaved African American, a man born into slavery. He was bought and sold on the slave trade multiple times. Scott and Taney's paths crossed when Scott's lawsuit, Scott versus Sanford, as commonly known as the Dred Scott case, when Scott sued his owner for his freedom, for him and his wife and his family, and that case worked its way up to the Supreme Court. On March 6, 1857, Taney wrote the majority opinion for the court in which he ruled against Scott. In that decision, Taney wrote, all people of African descent, free or enslaved, are not United States citizens and therefore had no right to sue in federal court. He further said that the Fifth Amendment protected slave owners' rights because enslaved workers were their legal property. The Scott v. Sanford, in that case, Taney argued that in his decision that the Missouri Compromise legislation that had been passed previously to balance power between slave and non-slave states was unconstitutional. In effect, this meant that Congress had no power to prevent the spread of slavery throughout the United States. Previously, in 1787, at the Constitutional Convention, you may be familiar with the idea of the 3/5 Compromise. It was adopted at that convention, and this was an agreement reached between the Southern and the Northern or slaveholding states and the non-slaveholding states that appropriated 3/5 of a person to every enslaved person in order to apportion representation in the House of Representatives. But in Taney's decision, in Scott's case, he wrote that Scott lacked personhood totally. He was property to be sold, to be purchased, to be inherited, to be transferred. He lacked total personhood. May 26, 1857, after losing this case, Scott was previously sold again, but he and his wife finally was granted their freedom by their new owners, in spite of what Taney and the Supreme Court had done. But I want you to note this, the irony of this story. Two men born under very different circumstances, one to privilege, one not. Taney, ironically, would later be the Supreme Court justice to swear in Abraham Lincoln in 1861. Abraham Lincoln, as we know, becomes what's known as the great emancipator, whether that's true or not, but he signed the Declaration that ultimately freed the enslaved persons. According to one source, the Dred Scott decision outraged abolitionists who saw the Supreme Court's ruling as a way to stop the debate about slavery in the territories. The divide between the North and the South over slavery grew and culminated in the succession of the southern states from the Union after the creation of the Confederate States of America. Ultimately, the Dred Scott, although he lost his lawsuit, and Taney wrote the winning decision, was victorious, some would argue, ultimately Taney lost. And Scott's win was for far more than himself and his family. Ultimately, his loss became a win for all African Americans and for the entire United States. So why do I share this? As we talk about gratitude, I ask you, do not look at the appearance of things to determine the truth of the thing. What may seem like a loss may ultimately be your victory. Keep an attitude of gratitude. Keep fighting with joy. Keep your head up and don't let go of your faith. Always, in this moment, right now, look up and be grateful. Love always wins. Joy is the sunshine of life, and rain, well, it's necessary to nurture the seeds of life. So as I close, let me leave you with the words of Maya Angelou when she said, "Let gratitude be the pillow upon which you kneel to say your nightly prayer. And let faith be the bridge you build to overcome evil and welcome good." An environment in which we're living now, for many, it's still a troubling moment as they are feeling anxious about what's about to happen, a change in our country and what's happening around the world with wars and devastation. I leave you with the song that my sister, Doretha, loved, and tell you that in the midst of conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged. God is still over all. And that's not a passive statement to say that we do nothing. Just as Taney thought he won by the stroke of a pen, and that Scott may have thought he lost because of that stroke of the pen, what we see is that time showed us that Taney really lost and Scott won, not just for himself, but for others. Count your blessings. Name them one by one. Count your many blessings and see what God has done. Ashe and amen.